Hello, my name is Vasilios Kosmakos, founder of the Florida Naturalist Oral History Project. From Panhandle to the Keys, the Florida Naturalist Project seeks to document the contemporary degradation of Florida's water systems. I've conducted over 60 interviews with a variety of stakeholders, ranging from scientists to business owners, fishermen, everyday individuals, and artists, on policymakers and indigenous people, in order to understand how all these different people are being affected. The matter of the fact is that understanding how all these different perspectives are interwoven with in the way that we talk about and discuss water in Florida, is crucial for us to understand how to best manage water in our state. I think a lot of times, right, we might hear about something like red tide or the degradation of the springs from a scientist, right? But that's not the only perspective that matters. Understanding how a fisherman gets affected by it, or a business owner, or an indigenous person, those are valuable perspectives. I mean, these are people that are being affected every single day by the condition of these waterways. Their voice is being heard. So what I've done is I've taken this wonderful cross section of Florida society in order to look at these issues a little bit more holistically. And as you can see here, I've interviewed some of the top scientists in the state. Robert Knight, who's in the bottom middle here. People like Dr. Jason Spadaro and Dr. Melanie Thomas Wilmore, the coral ecologist and limnologist, respectively. I've interviewed business owners like Tim Schwartzman, who you see in the top right, or indigenous people like Kevin Kniff, and politicians like Robert Blackman, in order to really help break down these different perspectives so that we can understand these issues more holistically. Because the matter of fact is that every single one of us, whether we are aware of it or not, is directly affected by water in Florida. We have to fundamentally understand that before we broke things up into smaller pieces, we've always inherently understood how things would come together, right? We are human as a result of our ability to understand how things come together. Before we became specialized, as we, progressed into more advanced societies, right? Before, we developed into these city states, and one person became a potter, and one person became a business owner, and one person became a soldier. We lived in these tribal groups of hunters and gatherers, and every single person understood these different topics, as readily as anybody else. Thousands and thousands of years ago, we understood how the heavens and the stars and the sun affected, the cycles that occurred on land and the water. We understood the power of story as a way to unite each other, as you can see through this picture I'm displaying. And bringing this idea back, and taking this idea of togetherness, right, and of looking at things more holistically into a more modern setting is exactly why things like the right to clean water are so important. It allows us to go back to our roots. It allows us for things to come full circle in order for us, to really approach things the way they have to be. And of course, what we're doing doesn't make any sense because we're breaking all these things up into different categories, and we're not looking at the interconnection of these things. Well, nature doesn't work that way. Nature works in patterns, and these patterns, manifest themselves over and over and over again. If you, as you can see through this picture here, right, it's like, the same patterns in nature are being replicated. When you look at waterways in Florida and you see how these creeks and these rivers and these, and these streams are arching across the landscape, it's very much reminiscent of the veins in our body, right? And they do the same thing. They carry, just in the same way that our veins carry, our platelets and our blood, and our blood cells and our white blood cells across the, across our body. Our bodies do the same thing. They're taking and they're carrying, every single thing we put in them, whether it's good or bad. Whether it's a species like a manatee, navigating our waterways, or whether it's effluent and nitrogen pollution that we're putting into these areas. They're all working the same way. Again, like if you look at things like the veins of a leaf, it's the same thing. These patterns in nature occur over and over again. This picture does a great job illustrating how it occurs biologically, but these patterns also occur in our psyche, in our political systems, in our economic systems. These are things we have to keep in mind, and these are things we have to understand in order to make the most effective decisions. Florida historically has been this milestone of progress when thinking about the way we've legislated water in the past. Florida was the first state to come up with clean water laws before the Clean Water Act got nationally recognized, right? And even currently, we have the most advanced water treatment plant in the entire world. Florida has always been at the forefront of these issues, and there's no reason why it can't come to the forefront again through the enactment of something like the Clean Water Amendment. Right? If we are able to make people understand that that we have to look at these issues more holistically, and we're able to be successful at it. Well, good ideas, as we're seeing, just like in nature, get copied over and over again. Our neighboring states might adopt it, and hopefully nationally, Florida can be once again a model for a natural piece of legislation to be increased. And again, this is an image of the watershed system that occurs across the entire country. As you can see, every single river, every single stream, every single body of water arches across the landscape, and it's all part, and they're all interconnected. I mean, as you can see here in this vast degree of purple, that's the Mississippi River Basin. That's one of the most productive watersheds on the face of this planet. And look where it goes to. Despite its immensity, its massive size, it all funnels down into one point, right? The Mississippi River Delta, right? And so every single thing that we're putting in this waterway, whether it's to the east in Pennsylvania, whether it's all the way to the north in North Dakota, at the very top, it's all coming down into these water systems. We recently had the case that occurred in East Palestine, where we had the unfortunate rail train development, and all that pollution went into our water supply. Well, guess what's going to happen? Of course, through dilution, right? It's not going to go directly, all the way down to the coast. But but I'm willing to bet that the traces of whatever poisons or whatever chemicals that we find that were there are going to go across this entire landscape and affect people in communities hundreds if not thousands of miles away. People that don't know each other, people that that live radically different lives are going to be affected by these things, and that's why we have to start looking at nature more holistically. Nature doesn't have borders, and we need to stop legislating it like it does. And then certainly, and to discuss more about the project I did, Florida is just a radically unique state. We have, we have the Gulf of Mexico to the west, with the Atlantic to the east, with the Caribbean Ocean, with the Caribbean Sea to the south. We have one of the highest concentrations of springs in the world, one of the highest concentrations of lakes. We often call Florida the Sunshine State, but it really should be called the Water State because of how prolific water is in every single facet of our lives. I mean, without water, Florida wouldn't really exist. And like I mentioned, Florida is just this radically unique state. We have the third largest coral reef on the planet. Again, we have the highest concentration of springs in the world, which are clear water systems. We have Tampa Bay, the largest estuary in Florida, but one of the most important estuaries probably in the United States. We have the Everglades, one of the most biodiverse place in the entirety of North America. And we take these things for granted, and we don't give enough credit to how these things bleed into each other. And the wonderful thing about the Florida Naturalist Oral History Project is that because of the scope of the interviews I've done, right, by interviewing so many different people, and through its unique geographic kind of extension, I was able to really track the story of water across really the entire state, right? So I was able to start. I was able to understand how water's connected all the way from the aquifer, which happens at the beginning of the state, and how what's happening in the aquifer ultimately bleeds down to the central part, and then fundamentally ends the Florida Keys, and that's what I do. So this is an image of the Florida aquifer system. The Florida aquifer system, is is the largest aquifer system in the entire Southeast. It goes all the way up to extends all the way up to South Carolina, extends all the way across the lower bottom portion of Alabama and across the entirety of Florida. over 90% of people in Florida rely on the Florida aquifer system for their water. And for those that don't know, the Florida aquifer is simply the body of water, the body of underground water sits beneath our feet. Over the course of millions of years, due to changes in sea level, right? Water seeped. Florida is made of this, rather porous limestone, where water seeped down into the limestone, and into these and into these vast caverns that formed as a result of variations in sea level rise, and pretty much filled the bottom of Florida up with this incredibly large pool of fresh water, that holds over a trillion gallons. As we can see, what happens across this entire system affects each other. What's being done, when people are over pumping or taking water out, in South Carolina, well, that's going to affect Georgia, and what Georgia does is going to affect Florida because it's all part of this vast, network. And even in only now through people like Wes Skiles, right, have we really started mapping the aquifer, maybe over the course of the last 20 or 30 years. And this is a map of just a very, very small subsection of the aquifer, in Weeki Wachee. As you can see, it's almost it kind of reminds you, or at least it reminds me almost of the rivers that kind of occurred across the landscape, right? But just underground, you have these series of canals and the different chambers and everything else that just right below us, and we need to start giving enough credit to we need to start understanding that what happens on the surface ultimately affects these bottom layers. As you can see down below, you have this you literally have an entire cavern. Down below where these houses are, you literally have the entire cavern, right? This huge that's sitting right below a house in cases. And what you do on this landscape, again, whether by altering it, by covering it with concrete and by developing it, you're decreasing the amount of land that the aquifer needs to recharge. Every single inch of concrete that you see here along this map is 1 inch of concrete that's stopping water from entering it. So you have quite a bit of this green space you kind of see across this image. Well, I mean, as time and time goes by, as we decrease that green space, that's all decreasing the amount of recharge that's going to the aquifer. So, even though the aquifer has a capacity of roughly 1 trillion gallons, that number is always in flux, because we're always over pumping it, or because we're decreasing the amount of water that's able to get into the system in the first place. And then and then you go into the Florida Springs. So right outside the Florida Spring, a spring is essentially where water comes up into the surface. But just like the aquifer, all water, like I mentioned, is in this underground layer. Well, sometimes because of pressure that naturally occurs, well, this water literally springs forth from the surface and creates a wonderful network of springs that we have. And again, Florida has one of the highest concentrations of springs in the world. And these systems are fundamentally connected. I want to play an excerpt, Lucinda Faulkner Merritt, that discusses this a little bit further.
The springs are the top layer of the Florida aquifer. So what's visible in the springs, the conditions in the springs, reflect what could be problems with our drinking water. When we look at the springs, we're not just looking at a spring, we're looking at our drinking water, we're looking at something that connects every single person who relies on that water, whether you're a water advocate, whether you're a farmer, whether you're a business person, whether you're a householder with a family and you want healthy kids. We're just all connected through this web. Actually, I've seen it as in a dream as a web of springs that pulsate and glimmer and shine throughout this whole landscape.
and to just further the point that the listener just made is that if you look at this map of the Swanee River Basin, and you look at how all these springs are just so close to each other, how Hornsby Springs is right next to Columbia Springs, and how Troy Springs is probably right on top of Spring 8972, and how Rock Bluff Spring and Pothole Spring are pretty much again right on top of each other. There's a lot of this talk of saving this spring or saving that spring. Well, I mean it's a lot more complicated than that. We have to protect the entire system. Which is and that's and again that's what the right to clean water amendment allows. It allows us to stop the degradation happening from one area, and which hopefully will help fix the sum of the whole. Because when we're able to stop the destruction of what's happening, upstream, we're able to give downstream a chance. And then after and after I conducted research in with the several springs advocates, I also conducted quite a lot of research in Tim Bay. Tim Bay, like I mentioned, is the largest estuary in Florida. It's home to hundreds of species of birds. Several hundred migratory birds use it as a stopover as they migrate south and north. It's an incredibly important habitat for a lot of the sport fish that we that we take that we value. There are red drums, our snooks, our sheepheads. It's a lot of it's mangrove, as you can see here, so it provides an incredibly important nursery ground for things like gag grouper and things of that nature. Tampa Bay is also is a world case study in recovery. So several years ago in the 70s and 80s, our seagrasses were just in absolute decline because of a lot of the because a lot of the pollution that was happening at the time. Well, people got concerned and people started did something about it. And the seagrasses of Tampa Bay, as you can see on the left and right here in the water, have made a tremendous recovery. Over the course of the last several years, over the last several decades, but then over the course of the last several years, even something as remarkable of a case study as Tampa Bay is now facing decline. We've lost over 12% of our seagrasses over the course of the last 5 years because of pollution that's occurring. As you can see in this image here, Tampa Bay sits at the nexus of several large rivers. You have the Alfea and the Hillsborough River that all kind of dump into Tampa Bay. Then you have a lot of these, and then as you can see in this image here, every single creek that leads into every single larger river, goes into just gets dumped into Tampa Bay. So whatever is done, in this landscape, in these farming communities, in these whatever is happening on the developmental front in these areas, it's all being it's all affecting Tampa, which is why we're kind of seeing this decline, is because we're having these nutrient flows, or we're having this increase in nutrients and phosphorus and nitrogen that's all being dumped into our waterways. So how can we expect to save Tampa Bay, if we're not legislating the entirety as a whole? And moving from Tampa Bay to Central Florida, the center of our state is just so unique because we essentially have this almost corridor, as you can see, of these wetlands are occurring. So before 1824, we had over before 1800, we had over 32,000 square miles of wetlands. Well, since then, since 1824, over 2/3 of wetlands have been drained or filled. And wetlands act as essentially a filter for our environment. All the pollutants are that get put downstream, all the tannins, or all the sediment. Our wetlands act as essentially a sponge in order to grab all that before it hits the bottom of our state. And as you can see here, on the picture of Florida to the left, again, you have this corridor that's kind of stopping all this stuff before it hits the Keys. Well, now, as you can see to the right, it's like you have, the vast, you kind of have this swath of Everglades that's still remaining, but that's minimal as opposed to what it was. And then the major corridor that occurred, near Lake Okeechobee, near the center of our state, that's all practically gone. I mean, you have a couple patches here and there, but it's all been relatively destroyed, which is just really which really disrupts the natural filtration process that the nature spent, thousands, if not millions of years to develop. And this is an expert of Dr. Thomas and Melanie Wilmore that are discussing just how the loss of these wetlands are affecting other bodies of water in the state.
We've had agencies say to us, we're taking the nutrients out of the lake and we just can't understand why it doesn't go back to what it was. And I'll say some basic question like, well, were there wetlands associated with the lake? We don't know. Why? I'll say, well, the reason is if you have wetlands contribute tannic color to the water. That tannic color moderates the algal growth for any given level of nutrients. And consequently, you need to know if wetlands were a part of that natural functioning of the lake system originally. We know that 2/3 of the wetlands, 50% of the state of Florida was a wetland in the early 1800s, 2/3 of which were destroyed by something like the 1970s. That means lake systems had natural wetlands around them. Those wetlands influenced the function of the lake systems. Aquatic plant communities were present in the lake systems, and they're an important part. They're structuring communities to provide habitat for fish, for all sorts of invertebrates. They stop the internal nutrient cycling by moderating wave action. And so all these things have changed. All the processes, the internal processes, all are altered. It's not simply the concentration.
As Dr. Wilmore so eloquently said, by getting rid of these wetlands and by, promoting the destruction of our habitat, we're completely altering the natural functionality of our ecosystems in Florida, and that's affecting our lakes, and that's affecting, our gulfs and our bays and our everything else, because we're giving nature's natural ability to fight against a lot of this stuff. And then, so I just mentioned, wetlands. Well, I also was able to conduct interviews in the Everglades. Like I mentioned previously, the Everglades is the most biodiverse place in North America. Thousands and thousands of species rely on Everglades. The Everglades, just as is a wetland. It acts as a, but it's not only wetland. Even though there's wetlands in it, it also has a high degree. It also has mangrove forest and seagrass beds and all this other important type of habitat. And again, and it's just plays such a such a vital role in the viability and health of the communities in South Florida. But again, making sure the water they have is clean. Without clean water, we have nothing. And as we can see in this map here, I discussed, we already discussed the wetlands, but here's kind of, through the alteration of the Everglades, we've completely disrupted the natural flow. Instead of having this natural Florida fresh water going from the center of the state all the way down to Florida Bay, well, we've completely disrupted that. Instead, now we're through this Calais-Sahuchi and the St. Lucie Canal on the other side of the Lake Okeechobee. We're pretty much taking whatever we put in Lake Okeechobee and just shooting it down on the right and left side of our coast, which, because of our current systems, takes that those problems and shoots up the rest of Florida. And that just isn't a viable way of hitting our problems. We have this nasty green algae that occurs that we see on the other side. The sugarcane industry and farming is king in these areas, and every single ounce of nitrogen, fertilizer, and phosphorus and other fertilizers, that get put into Lake Okeechobee, to our waterways, again, just gets shut up and down the east coast, and that's having a tremendous problem. And also, by disrupting the natural flow of fresh water across the state, well, we're also decreasing the salinity that occurs in Florida Bay, which is having a really big issue on the different organisms over there. Different organisms have different salt tolerances, right? Some species some species can live with more salt in their water than others. Well, Florida Bay, has already, species that again through millions of years have adapted to this flow of fresh water that goes down across the state, and this increase of salinity is having a tremendous impact on the amount of on the species are living there and the amount of species that exist currently. And this is Kevin Kniff that talks about how the Everglades is connected with everything else around us.
And the needs of the tribe in terms of Everglades restoration are not at all exclusive to the overall goals and needs and objectives of Everglades restoration that would serve the entirety of Florida citizens who depend on the Glades to be able to live here in South Florida. For you all up in the Gainesville area, where you still think that you are maybe removed from the Everglades, in fact, you are not. The water underneath this ground is a river of water that moves all throughout the state, moves north, moves south, based on head differences of water on the land. And that is very much affected by the water that ultimately is here on the southern part of the peninsula. So our future of being able to have Florida, in particular South Florida, continue to be a place for people to live is directly dependent upon whether or not Everglades restoration, in the way that it can be, is going to be successful.
Again, and I'll keep on repeating this point. What we do one part of the state affects other. That's why this amendment is important, because what we do, because every single person in the state is interconnected with one another. What we do in Springs affects what's happening in the Everglades. What we do in Tampa Bay affects what's happening in the central part of the state, and vice versa. We can't keep on legislating water, these waterways as different parts to the whole. We have to approach these things more holistically, because that's the way they operate. If we don't, then we're wasting our time, we're wasting our money, and we're wasting our energy. And finally, I was able to conduct interviews in the Florida Keys. The Florida Keys is the third largest coral reef on the planet, one of the most important ecosystems in the world. 90% of it's gone. I don't understand how that issue is not talked about more. 90% of the third largest coral reef on the planet is gone. And because of the destruction that's happening all across the state, and we're having more and more nutrients, into the Keys, which is having the adverse effect on our corals in different ways. It's causing stressing corals out, causing things like coral bleaching to occur. Because of what we're doing on a state and national level, climate change is becoming more and more of a threat to our corals. So it's just we have one of the most phenomenal ecosystems in the face of the planet in our own backyard, and some people don't even know about it. And what we're doing is just absolutely atrocious. And again, it all stems from this idea that we're not treating these things the way they're supposed to be being treated. As you can see here, through this depiction of our current systems, the Keys are roughly at the bottom, where the Straits of Florida are. And what happens in the Keys, right? Again, affects the rest of Florida. Every time you put pollution, down the Keys, well, the Florida current shoots up the West Coast. Whatever happens, what's also gets shot up the West Coast, things like the loop current, depending on the time of year. Effluent from Lake Okeechobee might make its way down the Keys. Might make its way up the coast, because our currents, act as essentially highways. Anytime you put something in, they're pretty much rivers underwater. Let's call them what they are. Every time you put something in one place, it gets carried down the other way. It gets carried up and down the area accordingly. And again, we're not giving enough credit to how connected these different systems are. And of course these currents obviously change. In variability in how they function, depending on the time of year, depending on how the winds are operating. But fundamentally, these are the major ones: the Florida current, the loop current, and the loop eddy. You know, and again, it just really showcases how how pollution, how influence, and how all this nasty stuff is just able to affect the entirety of the state. You know, and this is the type of destruction I was mentioning. Within 40 years, we've lost 9% of the reef. You see this picture of the coral reef in 1975. Do you see this picture in 2014? And think of it. Now we're in 2023. Add 10 more years. I mean, it literally seems like a bomb went off. And this is the direct result of what we're doing on land. This is the direct result of decisions being made at different levels of governance and different level, and even individual decisions that are causing these things to happen. We need something put in place in order to make sure that things like this don't happen again. And the solution is, to support the right to clean water. It's to support legislation that treats nature the way it deserves to be treated, the way it actually works. Because if we don't do that, if we don't fight, if we don't fight and push, in order to have our waterways unpoisoned, for ourselves and for our children, if we don't fight to keep these wonderful phenomena of nature, from being destroyed, then this entire state's lost. I mean, it really is. And with that, to learn more about the project, please scan this QR code here. Email me at BillyKosmakos11@gmail.com, text me or follow me on Facebook or Instagram, and also in this video I'm doing is part of a larger series. They'll be based on an exhibit created for the Matheson History Museum, and we'll be able to look, and we'll be able to go more in depth into each of the different sections, that I mentioned, a lot more in depth, and I showcase that in my exhibit. So hopefully we can do that more in the future. And with that, thank you and have a wonderful day.